Welcome. This presentation was delivered at the Scaled Agile DFW Meetup on April 10th, 2025. I've edited it slightly to jump right in. Let's get started.
At a high level, when we look at connection points, and I say POM stands for product operating model, right? POM is a shift in how organizations structure their teams, make decisions, and deliver value. And instead of organizing around projects with temporary teams, the product model emphasizes, this sounds familiar, long-lived cross-functional teams that own and continuously improve products. Now, so many safe implementations out there that I've met the people or talked with people, they skip that step where they organize around value. That just seems complicated, right? We don't want to do that. We've got 5 VPs that each have a P&L, and so we need to have 5 arcs. Those are our 5 value streams. I'm seeing some here in the room. I'm seeing some heads shaking yes, right? And so what happens is you never go back and fix that. So now along comes a strategic consultant who says, hey, you guys should organize around something besides these VPs. And they're doing it. Why? Because the person coming in is hired to advise your senior leaders. If you're an SPC who came out of an Agile Center of Excellence, you're probably not going to be in a situation where you're being asked to advise people or advise the board of directors, right? And so it's a much harder sell internally. So if you skip that step, give yourself some grace. It's really, really tough sometimes to sell that idea of doing the value stream workshop and organizing around value. But I want you to understand that sometimes what you'll see is that POM actually is organizing around value around these products. And as opposed to fighting that and saying, no, SAFe says value streams, what if you embrace it and say, wow, we're actually moving away from organizing around our functional silos into organizing around products. Hey, products and solutions sound kind of similar. There's a lot of similarities there. A value stream in SAFe develops one or more solutions. Well, what is a product? Another name for a product could be a solution, right? And so if you can get inside some of those conversations and maybe nudge it so you don't end up with 87 products, instead you end up with 10 products that are made up of smaller sets of products and services, kind of like solutions. You can find a good way to map that together. So it's also about shifting the focus, emphasizing outcomes, ownership, and flow. Several years ago, I worked in the government sector for about 3 years, and it was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. And I still do some volunteer and small work in the government. And what was interesting is that it was interesting is that I saw some examples of the most rigid and prescriptive SAFe I've heard of in my life. And I've also seen one of the top 5 arts I've ever seen in my life, both within the federal government. What separated them was that one of them was the government hired a small business, and it was a wonderful, trustworthy person who had never heard of SAFe. And so her company bid on this contract to be the coach for the company, for the government, and won. And so she went out and took implementing SAFe, and then she goes to help launch these arts, right? That's not her fault. And she had the one thing that many SPCs never gain: pure trust between her and her government leader. And that's something you can't buy, you can't train. That's just who you are. And so the sad thing, though, is that she didn't know what she didn't know. And so that resulted in some challenges for that implementation, right? The other one over here was one where they wanted to bring in somebody who's done it before to help them do this. And what's interesting is that what was true about both of them is they both had that trusting relationship. So when we think about these emphasizing outcomes, emphasizing flow, emphasizing ownership, those are all things that require you to have built trust with somebody. And the way you build trust with an Agile team is different than the way you build trust with product managers, which is different than the way you build trust with business owners, which is different than the way you build trust with senior leaders. And so as you look at a product operating model, ask yourself, who do I need to build trust with? Now, I want to go through some different perspectives on this. Marty Kagan, probably the the loudest voice in the product operating model world. And he has a company called Silicon Valley Product Group, and they are not pro-safe. And where I was going with that government story was there was a guy named Nicholas Shalane who he called himself the czar of software for DoD. And this guy sent out a scathing memo saying, avoid rigid and prescriptive frameworks like SAFe. And the government leader I was working with at the time, I showed him that and he laughed out loud. He's like, what? SAFe's not rigid and prescriptive. I mean, we've saved lives in 4 months. We started saving lives because of SAFe. But at the same time, there are people out there that said this is rigid and prescriptive and a waste of money. And so what you have to understand is that if your implementation is brittle, if your implementation has plateaued, if your implementation is not growing and expanding and your ceiling's not lifting continuously, if you're not finding ways to improve and deliver more value, you run the risk of people saying, why are we doing this, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. Can you blame the company for wanting to invest in something different? And so as practitioners, the more you understand what a product operating model is, the more you can integrate this into what you do already and avoid that shift, that turn. Now, the argument that Marty gives that I've heard listening to some of his talks is that teams aren't empowered, right? So teams aren't empowered to solve problems. They're doing feature lists without context, right? Success is measured by delivery, not impact, right? I've had that same conversation when I go in to kick the tires on somebody else's SAFe implementation, right? It's like people are building these features, but they would love to be able to see the tree, but they just get a sliver of bark and are told to go work on that piece of bark. They don't even know, they can't see the tree, let alone the forest, let alone the topography. And so product thinking really flips that. The idea there is that teams are expected to deliver outcomes, not just output, right? And so most importantly, product models create conditions for innovation with the time and trust to actually figure out what really works. In Scaled Agile, we've got the continuous delivery pipeline. People seem to forget that the first third of the continuous delivery pipeline is called what? Anybody know? Continuous exploration. You get a pin for that. Those of you that are remote, I can't send you a slide. So continuous exploration is the same thing you would see in a product operating model. It's basically making time and space for experimentation, for connecting with customers to ensure that you're building stuff that customers love, not just building stuff that somebody somewhere says this is the right thing to do, right? So this is stuff I extracted. And by the way, in the deck that I'll put up on I'll put the PDF up there. I've included links to a couple of the articles I pulled for this deck, because this is content that SVPG has out there publicly. And so I'm giving you the link to be able to go read that full article I pulled from, because I am pulling in some of their content here, or summarizing some of their content, right? Roadmaps are guesses without problem validation. Having a roadmap that's predictable, that's important, right? The reality is a roadmap can both be predictable and flexible, right? Oftentimes we get stuck in this piece where roadmaps are either completely unbelievable or completely rigid and also unbelievable, right? So there's this idea, business is saying, well, I was talking to somebody from USAA, and it's like, as for you, Jeff, right, is that, that there is no plan, right? That there is no estimate when we're going to get it. They'll say, you'll get it when you get it. It's like, well, if I'm a business leader responsible for P&L and customer relationships, that's a hard pill to swallow, right? And so you'll find is that you can still solve this through SAFe, but if SAFe hasn't solved it, your company might bring in a different way of doing it. But I want you to just kind of understand that it's all kind of the same, right? Special space to discover, not just execute, right? We've got the innovation and planning iteration, right? I've been doing LPM, I don't say exclusively, but so much of a focus for so many years now that I stopped saying PI. I usually say quarter now. Most of the clients that I've helped move to a 13-week cadence. It either mirrors their fiscal quarters or it mirrors their yearly quarters if they're on a calendar year. And you got a nice 13-week block there with a 3-week iteration, right? And none of them have said, our people were sitting on their thumbs for one of those weeks. I've never heard that yet, because there's always more work you can bring in, right? And so that it is nice and tidy. And so you do have that space. But remember, innovation is not just in the innovation and planning iteration. You've also got continuous exploration, which means you've got exploration happening every iteration, every sprint. Okay. Let's talk about McKinsey. So I'll tell you that for me personally, the 2 or 3 clients that have had Marty in there first, the challenge I have with following behind POM from this perspective is helping people realize that safe is what you make of it. And you might find that burning down what you've built is going to cost you a lot more than just fixing what you've been doing, right? A lot of the work I do as a consultant is getting people to raise their ceiling on what they're getting from safe. There's soft spots. We have crappy product management. Okay, fix that. We don't have engagement from the business. Okay, fix that. Don't throw away the whole way of working. You can just find ways to fix it. Now, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Books and I think there's a misconception about safe, but just to be honest, the product thinking is easier to understand because you have product, you have engineering, you have design. That's it.
Yeah.
And you go with it. But look at safe framework. It is different. It is kind of a little complicated. It has something to do with the name. It's scaled agile. People think about agile. They think about Scrum. They think about delivery.
Right.
But they're not thinking safe as the section of or lean portfolio management.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think if you could hear that, he was basically saying that the advantage of like SVPG's stuff is that it's really clearly focused on product. It's not all other stuff like Agile built in. And like I said, it really comes down. It's funny because I say this sometimes in my talks is that when you become an SPC, everything's about safe. And you walk around, myself included, when I first started, back in 2013, 2014, safe says this, safe, 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 right? So all you talk about is what safe says and what safe says to do. Because you don't know any better. This is the lens you're looking at the world through. You become an SPCT, some of them still safe, 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 safe. Some of the other ones, they focus more on the consulting and the trusted advisor role of an SPCT. They start realizing who really cares what you call it. It's about the outcomes we're achieving together. I don't know of a single fellow. Well, I know of one in Australia who's still safe, 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 but the rest of them really don't care. The work I do with portfolio management, it's the same, regardless of whether or not it's a safe implementation or a less, or a Scrum at scale, or some hybrid Spotify-ish thing. The work's still the same. The patterns are still the same. The practices are still the same. And so, from that perspective, if safe is a 4-letter word at your agency or at your company, ask yourself, how important is it to change that first? Because what you might find is that instead, fix the problems and then say, oh, by the way, this is safe, right? As opposed to trying to fight for it. Because I've never seen anybody who's in a first or second line management role at a company successfully be able to get senior executives to completely 180 when it comes to how amazing safe is, right? Solve some problems for them. And great point on the terminology there. All right, let me go to the next one here. So McKinsey's view. I've encountered 2 clients that have had McKinsey come in there, and I've read through some of their stuff. And this is about org change, right? This is basically saying, look, this is about organizational change. We have to touch all the different dimensions. We're not necessarily going to mess with how you do delivery, but it's about org change, right? So, traditional orgs are built around functional silos or departments, engineering, marketing, ops, right? Sound familiar? Right? I had the same conversation when I talk about safe, right? But if you've implemented safe without organizing around value, without having your value streams represent virtual organizations that deliver solutions or products and services, then this is going to be really attractive to your senior leadership because it really is pretty impressive stuff. Think about it. Organize around value. I mean, you can do a lot of good with that. So You didn't get to do it through SAFe, but now McKinsey comes in and they're getting you organized around products, product lines, product groups. Yes, sir.
Well, now there's this change that's very.
I don't know. So this is McKinsey's view, not Phil's personal view. Like I said, both of them have resorted in reporting structure changes.
Okay, but is that structural or organizational? We're not talking about technology there.
They're talking about basically one of the groups that I worked with, they were breaking up their IT organization. They have a core IT services, shared services type stuff, and then product IT teams would go into product groups, and that was functional hierarchy. The other one,
We went through that.
yeah,
Align
yeah.
the whole resources along with some big, it's bigger problem.
Yeah. And here's the thing though, with that model is that if the people that people are reporting to can't get out of the way and allow decentralized decision-making, then it still breaks, right? And so it's funny, it's these same things. I'll occasionally ping somebody with a scathing anti-SAFe article on LinkedIn, and I'll ask them if they'd be willing to have an intellectual conversation, because I really want to understand their perspective. And what I've determined personally is it really is all the same, right? I mean, who you want to give your money to is part of it, and that, you know, people make choices based on you know, their income, right? So that's there, right? Scaled Agile too, right? They want you to buy Scaled Agile stuff. Anyway, all I have to say that you know, they agree here, project delivery models are too slow and specifically can't keep up with the dynamic strategy. Resiliency, adaptability, recovery, right? Innovation. These are words that your senior leaders care about. And they're buzzwords inside the framework. But if your SAFe implementation is all about scaling the agile teams and getting an art launched, if that's why you implemented SAFe, was to launch an art, I've been there. I've seen people, why are you doing this? Because we want to launch an art, right? In the last 5 or 7 years, I'm like, why do you want to launch an art, right? You know, I remember going up to NASA Langley and did a leading SAFe class. And I came out of there and met with their leadership and said, I wouldn't recommend that you launch an art, because you got 11 different research scientists, all with their own personal development team. And from what every one of them says is there's 0 dependencies across those groups. So how about, let me talk to you about Kanban, you know, and then you could pull some patterns in, like having some shared demos to kind of, you know, do some wall walks and some Gemba to share cool ideas. But why would you create a dependency factory when you don't need one, right? So that idea of structure, right? Product models ask us to organize around outcomes. Some customers have been using SAFe since 2013, 14, 15, or even earlier. And for them, the word outcome wasn't part of the materials, right? You know, if you look at, I went back and looked at SAFe 3.0. I taught lots of those classes, and I went through that and I looked at the newer stuff. The word outcome's really not used much at all, right? When Scaled Agile first got started, it was specifically a scaled module for IT delivery teams, right? And it's expanded beyond that over the last 5, 7 years, but not everybody's got that memo, right? Second thing on McKinsey points out is governance and funding, right? So they point out that project-based funding cycles with detailed scopes and year allocations don't work well where priorities shift quarterly. Have you ever heard that before, right? And so they're talking about having persistent team funding aligned with strategic intent, right? Now, I will tell you that funding teams is a heck of a lot scary than funding value streams. From speaking to executives out there, the idea of funding persistent teams, that seems a lot less scary than funding value streams in our portfolio, right? At the end of the day, the result's kind of the same, right? And then the third part on here is leadership mindset. You see in that mindset in both the Silicon Valley stuff and the McKinsey stuff, it requires empowered teams and local decision-making. Local decision-making, AKA decentralized decision-making, right? Leaders have to let go of traditional command and control. They've got to focus on outcomes, context, and coaching. These are all things that, for me, are the same thing with SAFe. Having said that, I've met dozens and dozens of SPCs who don't think that way. And so if your company has met SPCs that don't think in those terms, because the only experience they have is in the classroom, then maybe SAFE's getting a bad rap. Yes, sir.
In my experience, what I've seen is both Marty's with his books, and McKinsey, the way they approach senior leadership is they've got a book they can read or listen to, on their next flight or their ride. And they can implant these ideas in their head. I don't see SAFE having a similar product. It's almost like you have to attend a class, and
Yeah.
so we lose a lot of the audience there in the way the other folks have a simple message that lands in leadership, as opposed to SAFE. We have the same content per se, and you can rename things, but the crispness isn't there.
I would agree. And part of that is the fact that, McKinsey, that's their focus, right? And even if they either hire the person who wrote the book or they publish the guide themselves, right? Versus, Marty Kagan, small company, right? SAFE, there was a book called The Rollout back when SAFE first came out. I don't know if you read that. It's by a guy named Alex Yakima, Ukrainian guy. He was one of the first original principal contributors to the framework. He was part, Dean's core team had Alex there. He wrote this book called The Rollout. Easy read, kind of like a fable, right? Very easy to read, but it's so outdated. Alex isn't with Scaled Agile anymore. And as Scaled Agile has grown and grown and grown, got acquired by a private equity firm, that idea of who's the author kind of goes away. Even Safe Distilled, I don't know if there's a Safe Distilled 6 coming out or not, but there isn't that one book. And I don't know that a single book would do it justice anyway, because it's so broad. I like to say, the way I look at this is, what Marty Kagan's doing is basically saying, okay, you need socket wrench set. Here's a snap-on one in a saddleback leather case that's gonna, you're gonna see it right there on the beach with the Statue of Liberty from Planet of the Apes. It's gonna last that long. Versus Scaled Agile being this monstrous, set of tools where you've got everything from tightening eyeglasses to a big massive sledgehammer. It all comes in there, right? And the art of SAFE is knowing which tools to use when, whereas over here, they've got specific tools for a specific problem, which is a lot easier to digest. And so all that to say, though, is kind of staying on track on my talk here, is really that we're seeing trends there empowering the teams. And so I have kind of for me, I'm sad sometimes when I hear companies give up on SAFE, because I don't think they need to. At the same token, I can also understand why they did and why another competing, or in their minds, competing framework helped. Because look, at the end of the day, if a government agency is going to be empowering their teams now and they weren't before, that's not a bad thing, right? If they're going to organize around value today and they weren't before, that's not a bad thing. And so just understanding how to get it to work with SAFE. Now, I will say with McKinsey, I haven't seen a lot of drive from the 2 clients I've worked with where they said, go out and do this for execution. And in both those cases, they were already using SAFE and planned on continuing to use SAFE. The challenge, though, was that one of the things that back when I used to work with a team of consultants, my role would be to come in, kick the tires. Sometimes I'd have a little extra set of hours where my job is to get the business engaged. So they're off launching the art, I'm getting the business engaged. That work to get the business engaged works really well in the context of getting an art going well, right? There's a lot of continuity there. And one of the clients I'm thinking about, that business owner engagement stuff is handled in a completely different area with a completely different set of coaches. And over here, you've got the SAFE team and team of teams coaches, and they're siloed, which, right, creates some challenges. Now, would I say that there's a better chance that they'll probably get the more appropriate coaching from what I know of the management consulting world? Probably so, right? Is that a missed opportunity for some of these people? Yes. And so to me, it's like harden your product management skills. If you have a SAFE implementation, that's the number, between doing some good LPM and getting some solid product management in place, you probably aren't going to have somebody come in and reinvent the wheel in your company with product operating model. With that said, let's talk about SAFE's view. So, as a SAFE fellow, we kind of, I like to think of us as kind of the think tank. So Scaled Agile, we're out there we're out there practicing, and the people who write the framework, a lot of them came from delivery and like places like MetLife and CVS, some amazing people like, Rebecca and Cheryl and others, Dr. Maynard on the government side. And but we're trying stuff out all the time. And we started having conversations 2 years ago about seeing product operating model popping up, right? It's happening more and more now. And so Scaled Agile has absolutely invested in stuff, and they released something, I don't know the exact date, within the last month, called the Executive Guide to the Product Operating Model at Scale. And I had the link in the deck, so you can go download it. But this basically kind of frames up the problem and shows you, here's the, what do we mean by a product operating model? It's these 5 core concepts. I'm not gonna go through the whole brief, but this is, it's not a book, but you've got, 8, 9 pages with additional, with cited sources down here, including SVPG, McKinsey, et cetera. And so Scaled Agile is investing in creating guidance around this. Last fall, the new framework big picture was finally released. And the idea here is that we just need a simpler view, right? It's gotten so big, it can be really complicated. At the end of the day, this is about portfolio leadership and coordinating across multiple products and solutions. It's about product innovation. It's about having great flow, the ability to release on demand, increasing value to the customer with fast feedback loops. It's much more simplified. My favorite article on here is portfolio leadership. I'm not going to go into that now, but product innovation, it's one of the newer articles, and it talks about product innovation, right? And it needs to be an integral part of a train's natural function. And so here are the 5 product innovation practices plus innovation culture. And it goes through and gives you more information. I didn't pull from this article for this talk because you can go read the article, right? But I want to let you know that there's more in there. And now these new articles have questions you can answer. So if you scan through the list of questions, right? How does this do this? How does this do that? So the framework's definitely invested in the product operating model. Okay, so we see the emphasis on value streams. We see the emphasis on product strategy, discovery, delivery. All those have analogs inside SAFe, right? This whole idea of strategic alignment, LPM, right? Now, like I said earlier, I've seen a lot of LPM implementations that don't have a lot of strategy to them. The strategy is handled separately, and then portfolio management is more about managing the projects that flow through. All right, I just want to check really quick to see if I had any questions that came in and I missed them, because I might have accidentally done that. One sec here. Okay. I know Mike and Jeff are on there. They're friends. If you guys, if I miss something in chat, feel free to just interrupt me. I know Mike's comfortable doing that for sure, because he's had to over the years. All right. So lean portfolio management, safe roles and practices fit to product aligned orgs. So let's look at this, right? What enables that product management model, product model at scale? So in the guide, you'll see these listed as disciplines. You may have seen them, you may know them as competencies. I'm not going to comment on that, but I will tell you that in the guide it says disciplines. And so these are 3 disciplines, referenced in that executive guide. And when we think about this, these enable the product operating model to shine, right? So, long-lived cross-functional teams with the skills to deliver continuously, right? Practices like built-in quality, DevOps, the way you design your agile teams, organizing around value, all of those things work with that first one. LPM, I think I've kind of beat that one a little bit now, right? It's kind of moving away from just funding projects, right? Invest in the right things at the right time and have the ability to pivot. This one client I had, they had 78 small portfolio, $78 million. When they implemented LPM, within 3 months, they had identified $35 million that would not have met the business case. And so pivot from that, right? The problem they had was So naive coach told, this 7 years ago, I told him, this is an awesome story. Go tell corporate finance. So they did. What did corporate finance do? Took the $35 million away, right? It wasn't until about 6 months later that we did a workshop with finance to help them understand just how significant that was. Imagine if your leaders identified stuff that wasn't going to have the impact that you thought and had the flexibility to just quickly pivot to something else, right? Because what happens right now is people don't pivot because they can't, because the processes prevent them from being able to pivot. So when we talk about the value stream funding, I look at this as project-based funding on one end of the continuum and full value stream funding on the other. Don't feel like you can't do anything unless you get here. There's lots of other stuff you can do in the middle that's going to get you a lot of the benefits of full value stream funding.
Lots of. You're punished for doing the right thing.
Yeah.
One was 35 million back, and everybody that's involved in that probably felt like it was a punishment for doing the right thing.
And
there's so many things that end up doing that where it carries the organizational momentum in a direction
I have not met any senior leaders that are okay with that. What ends up happening is these senior leaders, they aren't aware that it's happening. And, there's this such pressure to execute within their chain of command that somewhere along the way, someone makes a decision that's and not necessarily optimal for the business, right? Let me keep going here so we have time for more questions. Finally, leadership and culture, right? I mean, without the right mindset, every model is going to fail, right? I remember working with this big financial, my first job after I quit AT&T as an employee. I laugh and say, back then in 2015, I was awesome. I'm pretty good now. So I have a lot of humbling along the way. And this company, halfway through their agile implementation, they had serious cost cutting they needed to do. And so they adopted Spotify-ish. And it sounded great to the employees. They rolled it out from this exciting new thing. We're going to use this really cool model called Spotify. Everybody's going to apply for their own, for their new role. You can choose whatever you want. We want you to be satisfied. But there's only enough for 70% of you, right? It was basically a really nice, shiny way to lay off a third of their workforce. And so that model didn't necessarily work, right? Because the people that could leave, right, that were like, how is this leadership going to be different? It's not. The culture is going to be the same. Well, why do I want a command and control culture here? If I'm going to leave, I'm going to leave anyway. And so they lost some of their great people, and the people that stuck around, like I think about the internal agilists they had some amazing internal agilists. Most of them left, and the ones that stuck around were the ones that would give you their coaching playbook on exactly what you needed to do, right? Which we've all seen that doesn't always get you the way you need to go. So leadership and culture, these are all things that we're seeing over and over again in SAFe and in these other models, right? These other adoptions. So where does SAFe fit, right? It's got patterns and products. It doesn't need to be replaced. It can flex. In fact, if your framework right now, if people view SAFe as rigid and prescriptive, don't wait for something else to come in. Fix that now. The reality is that you can use SAFe however you want it. And, when I think about, like, with that NASA client, right? Scaled Agile didn't have any Kanban content at the time. But I remember sitting down with the PI planning workshop, the PI planning for stakeholders, and walking them through some of the things that happen inside this shared planning event. And I did that to say, hey, if you get to the point where you do have dependencies and you do need to plan together, you want 3 research scientists to work together on a big gnarly problem, here's some patterns that you can find inside SAFe, right? So SAFe can be implied even if you don't go through all the training. Now that's Phil's take. It may not be Scaled Agile Incorporated's take because they stay in business by selling training, right? And through selling subscriptions to SAFe Studio and SAFe Plus and stuff. But all that to say is that SAFe's focus on organizing around value with long-lived teams, right? That alignment at multiple levels, continuous delivery, continuous exploration, all those things directly support product thinking. Yep, you can map your Agile release trains to product groups or even customer journeys, right? I've worked with clients. This is, we now, they're starting to have some names for this. So there's a new offering from Scaled Agile called Advanced SPC. I gotta tell you, I've taught it twice and I love it. The reason I love it is because with one exception, I haven't had anybody who signed up for this 3-day class with me who hasn't done this stuff before. So these aren't people who just want the badge. These are people that have, most of them are an internal change agent at a company that's on their own. And just watching them get validated that they're not alone from the peers in the group through these group discussions and role plays we do and stuff. It kind of feels, it seems that way, but I'm actually doing a webinar for Engaged Agility. We haven't announced it yet, May 1st, and I'm kicking off I did a series a few years ago called the SPC Journey, where it started off as more of a traditional webinar, and then it kind of became a talk show where I would interview SPCs that did some cool stuff out there, SPCs that built a community, or SPCs who were veterans. And I'm kind of thinking about doing the same thing. The series is called From Arts to Outcomes. But the first episode, I'm interviewing 3 different SPCs that took that class experience to share, the challenges they've faced and what they've learned, and one of them's a consultant, one of them's a internal change agent for a healthcare company, and one of them's a veteran working in the government sector. So kind of cool thing there. Anyway, I don't know. That's a squirrel. I'm going to run myself back in, right? But yeah, so customer journeys, there's more. My point I was trying to make is in that ASPC class, there's some new content in there that we talk about, such as different ways to organize your portfolio. For example, organize your portfolios around business units, right? And so when we think about a customer journey, you might have customer journeys there. The customer journey to get a loan, right, might be very similar to the customer journey through a development value stream that delivers loans. But the difference is that if you go around the customer journey map, you're going to have the people who are supporting that customer, who are interacting with that customer, who are operating the tools, who are doing the work, not just the development work. And when you get that type of business focused or business enabled art going, it's a different animal. And so those are there are patterns out there that can help you with this. All right. These are I just wanted to include it in here, right? So these concepts originated with SVPG. They're now officially supported in the SAFe guidance. So I took this image directly out of that executive guide for SAFe, right? So, product teams, product discovery, product delivery, product culture, those are all terms that you're familiar with. I'm just going to wrap this last bit up and then we can open up for questions, and I can go back to certain slides as needed. So other connection points, just to summarize here, right? They share more more than just intent. There's practical connection points, right? So there's a shared focus on flow, on feedback loops, on customer value, right? Product teams, agile teams, and arts, right? Depending on the scale you need. How big is your product? Product strategy, we've got strategic themes, OKR, portfolio vision. There's definitely synergies and connections there. Product discovery, design thinking, continuous exploration, customer centricity, right? Delivery, DevOps, agile release trains, PI planning, built-in quality, all those things. And then that culture, right? The SAFe core values, if you look at those don't necessarily have to apply to lean and agile. Those can apply to anything, right? Make value flow without interruptions, decentralized decision-making. Yeah.
I'm teaching some classes to very waterfall group. So that's the one thing I know with values, with principles and everything. I talk about my waterfall things apply, and then they're relating to it at least within their own teams.
For the people on the group, just to restate what she said, is that she's working with some very traditional waterfall groups today, and she uses the principles and the values and to help kind of illustrate that these were there with waterfall as well. And to piggyback on that, I've seen great waterfall outperform crappy SAFe, right? And if you look at why, it's because, wow, we've got great communication, we've got accountability, we've got a Kaizen mind, we've got, all those mindsets and values that allow SAFe to shine, allow anything else to shine. Okay, so wrap up our key takeaways here, right? They are gaining traction. You're gonna, if you haven't encountered them, you are gonna see them. SAFe has those patterns and those disciplines there. You don't have to pick, it's not SAFe or POM, right? It's really, how can we blend the two of these together? If you get in front of it, in my opinion, you can do everything that's listed in POM through SAFe.